Hey, Social Psych, it's Dr. Gilchrist, and I'm finishing up talking about how we can improve group processes. So this will only be about 5 slides, so you'll be good to go for this section. And then I will start filming another video where we talk about prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping. So one of the things that you've probably learned talking about the way that groups operate is that we often have the assumption that things will go more smoothly in group work, despite the fact that many of us have experiences with group work not really going very well. And as we have seen, being in a group doesn't necessarily mean that decision-making or those dynamics get done faster or better. So we've seen social inhibition where performance gets worse when other people are watching you. We've seen social loafing where people tend to work less when they're in a group. We've talked about groupthink where this illusion of group cohesiveness basically creates poor decision making. And we've talked about group polarization where you basically have managed to create an echo chamber or a bubble with like-minded thinkers. And so there's this illusion of group effectivity. We have this idea that groups will inevitably work better than an individual would work on their own, and that's not always the case. So what can we basically do to make sure that groups do work effectively? Well, we can do a couple of different things. One of the things that we found is that part of the reason that groups don't often work very well with things like social loafing and micromanaging is that people have self-concern. So if we appeal to somebody's self-interest, we may find that groups can work better. So even in a group, individuals do have their own goals that they wish to achieve. Researchers have said that you can potentially provide incentives. The catch with that is that when we have incentives for performance, there's the possibility of comparison. Now, that can make some of us more competitive and can help drive performance, but it could potentially lower one's level of work. So incentives can sometimes be a double-edged sword. Another thing that we can do is we can ensure that group norms do not encourage loafing. So earlier in the semester, I had you complete a group charter with different guidelines and norms for how you wanted to behave in groups. You could have very well put in your group charter that everybody had to pull their own weight and there would be consequences for pulling one's weight, or for not pulling one's weight, rather. Additionally, one of the things that we mentioned is that oftentimes when information is shared, we often focus on information that everybody already knows, and we don't necessarily focus on information that not everybody knows. So another thing that we can do is we can encourage full open sharing of information, but there do need to be safeguards in place. First of all, we need to reduce time pressure. One of the things we saw with respect to groupthink is that one of the antecedents is that there was a lot of stress and time pressure. Additionally, you'll want to make sure that you break into subgroups, break into smaller groups, so that people feel more comfortable sharing information. Additionally, you can bring in or have somebody assume the role of a devil's advocate so that you're getting different types of perspectives. And then finally, remember that leadership is kind of critical here. If group leaders are ensuring that full information is shared with everybody in a group, that will encourage sharing at other levels because leadership is modeled from the top down and leaders set an example for how they want others in the group to behave. Additionally, we can set goals that can be reached. Now, this is going to be true for any type of goal that you want to meet. They need to be specific, and they also need to be challenging, but not so challenging that they're not attainable. And the reason that you want a specific, challenging, yet attainable goal is that this increases commitment, and the specificity of a goal can improve communication and one's ability to coordinate. Generally, when goals are vague, it's a lot harder to make decisions and it's a lot harder to communicate because everybody might have a different idea of what that goal represents. And then finally, considering diversity within a group. Do other perspectives and other points of view need to be considered? One of the things that we find is that groups will form on the basis of similarity. And one of the perks of having a group form with similar members is that decisions will be made more quickly, the group's a lot more cohesive. But the downside of this is that if somebody thinks differently, those people might be ostracized, thus increasing the risk of groupthink. And just as a reminder, as we talked about in class today, oftentimes we're going to find that if a majority of people think that this is a certain route that needs to be taken or a certain plan that needs to be taken, if the majority of people believe that, that's what the group as a whole is often going to go with, even if there are people who do not agree with that particular plan of action. So diversity within groups can have benefits. You're going to have a reduced likelihood of groupthink. There are greater opportunities for info sharing because we know very well that somebody from a different group or somebody that has a different point of view may not necessarily have the information that we need. Now, the problem, though, is that there's naturally going to be conflict when you have people who do not necessarily think like you. And in those different stages of group formation, groups may have difficulty forming due to that greater likelihood of increased conflict. So folks, this is pretty much all I had for group dynamics. I will be back shortly to talk with you a bit about prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping.